So Gliscor just got banned from Gen 9, which is like seeing an old friend succeed in the best of ways. Man, I mean, I'm feeling old because just the other day I saw that one of my oldest Pokemon buddies just had a kid. And that's not... I've been around long enough to where that's been happening for a while now. But, we're the same age, so... Yeah, so if he's watching this, congrats, man. So, yeah, I feel similarly about Gliscor's, forcible eviction from OU. Or promotion if you like to think that they did it gently, but I don't think so. He's a scoundrel. Yeah, my friend CL used to chastise me for my pronunciation of Gliscor, and I always knew that it's wrong to say Gliscor. I know, it's a gliding scorpion. It's Gliscor. But I just like the way Gliscor sounds, so I am willfully being wrong about this. Anyway, yeah, so I'm sure Gliscor will be back in Gen 9 in like 2 seconds because there's another DLC coming at the time of this video. But I thought that this grand occasion would grant us an opportunity to revisit some of Gliscor's glory days. And my personal favorite Gliscor, no bias at all, I assure you, is Gen 4. Before he had that fancy poison heal, and when he was still one of the best, scariest Pokemon around. But, we'll go through all the greatest hits. And I gotta say that Gliscor getting banned from Gen 9 did not really surprise me. I mean, maybe a little since it didn't have Roost, but then again, Protect Poison Heal Gliscor is already the devil and has been ever since Gen 5. So, it's not that surprising. Especially because everyone was saying during Gen 8, oh, as soon as Gliscor gets released, it is getting so banned with nothing being able to run Hidden Power Ice anymore. And, you kind of wonder, does that say more about Gliscor's brokenness or Hidden Powers? But that's another discussion. But then, of course, there is the fact that it didn't just get dropped into a generation where there's no Hidden Power, but also the fact that it has both spikes and toxic spikes now. And of course, terrestrialization. I don't even know what it terrestrializes into, but I'm sure nothing pleasant. Actually, I do know a little bit because I watched an Uber's game the other day. And the Gliscor terrestrialized into a water type, I think, which is not surprising because water is such a great typing. So I'm sure it does that, or fairy, or steel, or something. But there was something just so profoundly wrong to me, like something cosmically incorrect about Gliscor both using spikes and then later being affected by them, without gravity in effect or something, you know what I mean? So it just caused discomfort in my soul. it was just so, oh my god, that was uncomfortable to watch. So yeah, that was the gist of what I know about Gen 9 Gliscor. Hey, I mean, if it's great in Ubers, then, you can just go enjoy it in Ubers. And I do enjoy when Gliscor pops up in Ubers. I think that's cool. So, yeah. Now, Gliscor in the olden days, meaning like even Gen 7, then it was already doing that whole I'm unkillable with poison heal thing. Like, it's been referred to as a Magic Guard Pokemon as far back as, like, Gen 6, I think, because like it is a switch into like weak scalds from things like Alomomola and Toxic, and of course, and once it has its poison heal activated, it's fairly immune to knockoff as well. It doesn't care because it's already got the Toxic going, so it doesn't mind losing its Toxic Orb, and that's a big reason actually why. Well, and to go back to the Protect thing, which relates to this, then even in Black and White 2, once Gliscor got Roost, obviously when Gliscor first got Roost, when Black and White 2 was first released, everyone was like, well, forget Protect then. Because throughout Black and White 1, Gliscor was one of the best, most important physical walls around, and it only had Protect for recovery. And, with double leftovers, that's kind of good, considering its spikes immunities and everything. But yeah, and then everyone used Roost, and then, some players, including myself, were like, hey, Protect is still kind of nasty, just for the, yeah, less you, wow, I tried to say well and yes and a million other words at the same time. yes, it does heal more, in one chunk, but Protect gives you more immediately and with greater safety. And, scout things, so, you heal on something like Specs Latios or Keldeo, no fear of anything there. And you rub more chip damage into them, and what is Gen 5 about if not chip damage? So, yeah, that became really popular again, and now it can go back and forth, depending. But that specially defensive Gliscor that really took over Gen 6, there have been so many moments in Gen 6 and 7 OU where there was just like so much Gliscor panic in the air because you could have a million ice moves you'd throw at it and it would still find a way to Swords Dance up and roost everything off and kill you anyway. So that was always fun. There were so many instances of how could I possibly be more prepared for this thing, and it just find a way to win. And obviously, they had more sets than just Spit FSD, like Stealth Rock sets. I think are fantastic in Gen 6 as well, but they are more popular in Gen 7. I remember they became popular in Gen 7 because you could outspeed Zygarde, so you could Toxic it. If it subbed, it's the sub Coil Zygardes you could beat. Because if you switched it on Coil, then obviously you were fine. And if you switched it on a sub, then you would give it a few attack EVs and you would break the sub, and then you'd threaten Toxic on it afterwards. And it was one of the few ways of dealing with that monster. So, and then, once Zygarde leaves, then you can still use that set because it's fantastic. You can throw a U-turn on it. There's some really nasty teams with that. But yeah, that whole unkillability thing. And then Gen 5, the whole Spit F thing works as well, but not quite as well. Because the base power, obviously there's permanent rain, but there's, even when you've got sand going, the base powers of moves are higher. Like, Draco Meteor is 140 base power in Gen 5, as opposed to 130 in Gen 6 and 7. And Ice Beam is 95 as opposed to 90. Hidden Power Ice is 70 as opposed to 60. That applies to things like Surf as well, 95 as opposed to 90. And, when there's not that much of a difference between Surf and Scald, more players are going to go with Scald, as seen in Gen 6. Like, Gen 5, not running Surf on Keldeo is like, what are you doing? Yeah, Scald is cool, but the Surf power is important to go alongside Hydro. The more accurate option for Hydro Pump. You can't be not doing any damage. But in Gen 6, it's like, what are you, crazy? Of course I'm running Scald. Surf is not that much stronger. So, there's that. More and more Scalds mean, weaker water moves. And even being able to take on things like Fire Blast better. So, Gen 6 and 7, and I assume 9, I don't know, then they lend themselves to Spit F Gliscor better, in terms of making it so purely unkillable. Whereas in Gen 5, Spit F Gliscor is still extremely good. Reuniclus started using HP Ice because SD Gliscor popped up as one of the only reliable answers to standard Psyshock Focus Blast. And because everything else would get worn down by sand and rocks and spikes, and it would, it was vulnerable to trapping. Whereas Gliscor, is pretty much immortal with Poison Heal, so it would, go the distance against Reuniclus, and then Reuniclus started running HP Ice, and then a bunch of other things happened after that. But it all started because of Gliscor walling things, or walling Reuniclus. So, and Gliscor's coverage, I was about to say, Ice Fang versus Facade, and one of the main reasons you want Ice Fang is, well, to help out with Dragonite, for sure, and Garchomp, but also other Gliscor. Facade is generally much better for things like Rotom Wash. But, yeah, it's, it is kind of bonkers to just imagine, people will always say, oh, well, what if Gliscor had Poison Heal in Gen 4, LOL? And it's like, yeah, that would be a nightmare. I don't want to immediately say, jump to the banhammer, but it would be deeply, deeply unpleasant. It wouldn't be... No, actually, no, it'd be pretty unkillable, with that level of healing. Good lord, I don't even want to think about it. So I'm very, very thankful. And for my money, that makes Gen 4 Gliscor the coolest because of how successful it is in OU and Ubers without Poison Heal. But yeah, as soon as Gliscor got Poison Heal in Gen 5, then it was also being used in Ubers. And that was what made it so scary. It would just wall Groudon and Toxic everything. Toxic EQ, classic combo. Oh, wall with my Skarmy and my Ferrothorn. Oh, you get taunted, never mind. It's right out of the Gen 4 playbook. But Gliscor being explored in Gen 4 Ubers was really after the fact. It wasn't used when it was the current gen. That was more when, oh, let's see if this thing can do anything. So, yeah, Gen 5, I mean, right from day one, Excadrill, back when it was Doryuzu, was running around and just destroying things. And Landorus, or Randarosu, as it was initially translated as, the whole reason why Landorus ran HP Ice at first was because Gliscor would wall it otherwise. You had your Protect Gliscor because you had to get the healing. And another reason the Protect Gliscor popped up again in Black and White 2 was because you had to get that Toxic Orb activated as soon as possible. You can't lead off against a Rotom Wash. Oh well, now and then later on you can't switch into things that you should be switching into to blank their status because your Toxic Orb isn't active. So it's much easier to lead off and protect, and then you have it, and then your opponent can't do things like force out Gliscor and then start throwing Will-O-Wisps around. And oh no, you can't absorb them even though you have a Gliscor because you didn't get it activated. Protect solves that. So yeah. Yeah, but so even when it has Roost as an option, I think Protect is really good. With Poison Heal, obviously. But yeah, it took over Gen 5 Ubers. Didn't get used much in Gen 6 and 7, I don't think, so I am glad to see it make a comeback. But, I mean, especially defensive Gliscor, I mean, it's shining most in Gen 6 and 7 when it can do stupid things like Spit F with, against weakened Hydro Pump, letting it stall out like Rotom Wash. Really, really ugly. And incidentally, that is why I think offensive Rotom Wash is very underrated. You just make Gliscor look like the stupidest thing on the planet. Like, oh yeah, you were gonna wall this. Yeah, and it's a good offensive Pokemon in its own right. But yeah, that's it's still very possible in Gen 5, especially because Gliscor also has access to knockoff, just because it wasn't good enough at the War of Attrition. So it's just wearing you down. Oh, it's Gliscor causes really visceral feelings in the opponent because, we all have that urge of, oh yeah, I don't want to, get switched around on for a million turns and stalled out, and Gliscor excels at that because it's so hard to punish for clicking Protect. I mean, think Advanced Skarmory as another example, which is similarly resilient to passive damage and it Protect, and that's 6.25 at a time. And imagine this 12.5 per turn, so 6.25 with Protect, then you functionally make it 12.5, and then 12.5 doubling into effectively 25 over 2 turns is absolutely insane. And yeah, and you really struggle to punish it for doing so, so it's just very free. I mean, I haven't seen many games where players are successfully able to PP stall Gliscor's Protect, although, hey, that's a tactic. But yeah, when it was early on, it was doing in Gen 5. It was SD, Protect, EQ, and then Facade for Rotom Wash or Ice Fang for other Gliscor, and to help out with Garchomp. Although you would miss because of Sandveil, LOL. But Facade actually hits single super effective targets like say Thundurus harder. So because 65 times 2 from Ice Fang is less than the 70 times 2 from Facade. So yeah, I'm just thinking about how we went from SD protecting, and then, it would be walled by Skarmory, quote unquote. This always happened, every generation, oh, this thing will get walled by the Steel Flying Poke, and then it's as simple as Gliscor uses Taunt, and the entire metagame remembers that it has Taunt and has to, readjust itself. Which is weird, because coming from Gen 4, Taunt was Gliscor's bread and butter. The old standard set, which you don't really see anymore, unfortunately, thanks to post-Gen 4, then, when Gen 4 was still being played, then Breloom just erupted in popularity, really taking advantage of the Latias and Salamence bans. And then eventually you had things like Clefable as well. And with those as such big answers, then you don't really need Toxic. And, Gliscor does its job with EQ, Taunt, Roost so well that, even old school Toxic Gliscor didn't always need to run Toxic. You could run U-Turn or Stealth Rock, that was popular then. But, yeah, now it became more... I remember I was really experimenting a lot. At first it was Aerial Ace, just to really ruin Breloom. And then I was like, okay, Ice Fang gets the job done as well. while also helping out against things like Dragonite and Flygon. And other Gliscor, of course. But there's the... You do miss Toxic sometimes when Swampert gets a little too comfortable. But then, I was experimenting with, like, Ice Fang, and Heist was experimenting with Knockoff, which is its own form of... not very good into Breloom, granted, but the upside is so huge against everything that... Like, for example, a set that was also popping up to deal with Standard Taunt Toxic Gliscor in Gen 4 was HP Ice Bronzong. And, you knock off that Bronzong, and it's just dead. So, those were some big post-metagame developments. But I am nostalgic for the days of current Gen 4 OU, where the standard Gliscor was Jolly, max HP, and at first you would say 216 speed, because all you need to do is outrun Lucario and Roserade, and then the rest in defense. And then, maybe 220 speed to creep on that. And then, no, never mind, we're just going all the way to max speed. That was like the good player trick. You gotta go to max speed, because you might have to win that Gliscor speed tie. It was fairly gruesome. Especially with Sandvale. Oh, and I mean, on the subject of Sandvale, Sandvale Gliscor, I mean, it did this in Gen 5 too, and obviously the first thing you would always hear was, oh, well, it's not Garchomp, it's not that bad with Sandvale. And obviously we now live in a more enlightened, liberated time, where not everything has to be literally Garchomp in order to be banned with Sandvale. I mean, we even ban Cacturne now, and that's a good thing, by the way, in case my tone was misleading. That should absolutely be the case. Sandvale is stupid and uncompetitive, if you want a less emotionally driven word. But there's the whole problem where, it's not literally Garchomp, it's also a Gliscor, and SD Gliscor is not just, you don't just toss SD on it, well, it's a wall, and I guess I want it to do some damage if it can. No, it is a threat, especially because it's got a great speed stat and Stab Earthquake, and the absolute devilry that popped up post Excadrill and Thundurus bans, and I think... Actually, no, I take it back. I think it was still around even when Excadrill and Thundurus were still around, in their final months in the summer of 2011 and Gen 5, where there was this new alternate Sand Abusers, like Excadrill and Landorus, and, oh, hey, what about this Gliscor set? And it was Substitute, Swords Dance, Earthquake, and Acrobatics with a Flying Gem. And Sandvale, because obviously the standard Gliscor set is SD Protect, EQ, Ice Fang, or... Actually, I take it back, not just SD Protect, but I forgot that some of them ran SD Taunt. It wasn't just Taunt, Protect, EQ, Ice Fang, that would come later. And, other sets were experimented with, too, like, I remember with Ace Matador, we talked about Taunt, U-Turn, Protect, EQ. That was a great set. Really gave a lot of momentum to stall teams that I like to use. Even stall teams in that Black and White 1 era were using the Volt Turn strategy that was really becoming popular for the first time. But the SD sets would also run Taunt sometimes, and yes, they didn't love running losing Protect, but completely having the threat of SD Gliscor and not being neutered by Skarmory while not requiring Magnezone. I mean, in a metagame as chaotic as that, you take things like that. I don't have to take up a slot on Magnezone just to... Not that Magnezone was bad, and of course you could do SD Protect with Magnezone, a strategy which, is fairly consistent, even today. And in more in Gen 6 on and onwards, you would run SD Roost because you do stupid things like Roost on Roost off Latios. But I'm sure Protect would work there if you used it too. It's just Roost really lets you do dumb stuff like roosting on slower ice beams from like Clefable, for example. That's a really big one. So yeah, so you would run SD Taunt, EQ, Ice Fang, or Facade, of course, but you would also sometimes run Sandvale, if you had Excadrill checked, obviously. A big if, considering how broken it was. But yeah, it was joked that it was like Garchomp in that it was a Rotom Wash counter, because what is it going to do? Hit Hydro or Will-O-Wisp through Sandvale? Obviously, you don't switch it into that, but if Rotom Wash switches into you, it's dead, You're trying to hit Hydros against a Sandvale Pokemon spamming Substitute? Yeah, good luck. And SD Flying Gem boosted Acrobatics hit so hard that it would pretty much slam anything that wasn't a Skarmory, and obviously there's a million ways around that. And that set was on a lot of the best, most dangerous teams, including a team I co-built with my buddy Funkasaurus that I'm very proud of, which was very defining of that era. It was Hippo, Fori, HP Ice Fori. That was popping up for this Gliscor set. I mean, for Landorus too, and for, oh god, I forgot Sub Protect Toxic Gliscor. Now that set stalled out entire teams. That was like the immediate death of Dragmag. Nothing will beat Dragmag harder than that set one-on-one. It's not even funny. And you have to have... That's why, Gliscor twists all these metagames around its own longevity. Because otherwise, whether it's dealing with SD or toxic stuff or taunt stuff, or, some mix thereof, it's always going to be really, really brutal. And even like in Oris, when taunt knockoff... my buddy Hugo, or Great Astard, was messing around with taunt knockoff Roost Toxic. It was disgusting. It's still a great set, I think. Half the time, the problem with those Gliscor sets is that you get blanked by other Gliscor, so you gotta take it into account somehow. Although, stalling other Gliscors with faster taunt is actually kind of a good strategy. It's like, okay, what are you gonna do here? Just flail against me with EQs and facades? It depends on the context, of course. But yeah, SD, sub-SD acrobatics was just absolutely vicious on that team with, on a lot of teams. But we had Hippo, HP Ice, Volt Switch 4, Bolt Beam Fortress, Sleep Powder Roserade, used over the more common, specially defensive Celebi of the time, because it absorbed Toxic Spikes against Rainstall, and had broken Gen 5 Sleep. So... It was great there. Scarf Jirachi, Jellicent, and of course the Gliscor, which was just a game ender. Yeah, it was so disgusting. So it really just, this was pre-Landorus Therian, of course, and then Lando T comes out. It's like, oh wait, Gliscor is still insanely broken, sub-toxic and SD and everything. Or not so much SD at that time, actually. It was all about sub-toxic because of how much it forces auto wins almost against so many team styles, and that really shaped the metagame around it. But of course, it is not the same thing as Lando T, because Gliscor switches into Toxic, Lando T, dies slowly. So when the game becomes more and more about that longevity, then... Yeah, so the Gen 4, during that current gen, then you pretty much always had support Gliscor. Not to say that... I remember Ostamentitos had a team with SD Gliscor on his team with Lunar Dance Cresselia, which was one of the, only teams to make use of Healing Wish, a form of Healing Wish, during the current generation. It was a great team, but by and large, you had that Taunt Roost Toxic EQ set. And, with, EQ, sorry, not over EQ, U-Turn or Rocks over Taunt. Some teams would run, Rocks, U-Turn Gliscor, with Rocks, U-Turn, Roost, and EQ. But every time you would run such a set, you would miss Taunt. It was just so important. And I remember Megan Fox, which is the name of a user, not actual Megan Fox. Wouldn't that be crazy? But no, this was the late 2000s, so of course Transformers was crazy, so Megan Fox was an inspiration for the username of the player base. I wonder why. Yeah, Megan Fox had this semi-stall team, which was very characteristic of its era. I think if you want to go digging in the Smogan RMT archive, the team is literally called Megan Fox is Hot. And as I remember, it is Gliscor, Skarmory, Rotom, Scarf T-Tar, because Scarf T-Tar was all the rage. More on the beautiful Scarf T-Tar Gliscor pairing in a second. And then Calm Mind Suicune, and then Wish Calm Mind Jirachi. I could make maybe I will make a whole video about that era because of the nostalgia I have for it. But I mean, Gliscor, Scarf T-Tar, Wish Calm Mind, Jirachi, those three were just it. Can't stress that enough. And on that team, Megan Fox was like, well, okay, if I really need this Gliscor healed, I'll use my Wish for my Wish Calm Mind Jirachi. But I like Rocks. Obviously, I need Rocks. Need EQ, and I love U-Turn for what it does. And U-Turn on Gen 4 Gliscor is actually incredibly underrated, I find, even today. And he was like, yeah, but I don't want to give up Taunt, because then you'll get taken advantage of by Skarmory. What a waste. And Gliscor is so great with longevity that depending on how you play, you don't necessarily need... So that's an example of how creativity can go a really long way. So yeah, that Scarf T-Tar Gliscor, I mean, one of the flaws, quote unquote, with Toxic Gliscor was, oh, it's walled by, Subsplit Gengar, which is a major threat at the time. Oh, you U-turn on it. Well, and now Scarf T-Tar is in for free, and goodbye. Obviously, it's such a great Pokemon in general. Like, even in a one-on-one against Breloom, you can see if the Breloom's going to want to stick it out against you, or catch a switch it. And if it does stay in, you also get chip damage. I mean, it seems very obvious, and it is. It's not like a completely unheard of move. But I always found that U-turn on Gliscor, just because of how great... I mean, it's not exactly shocking. Gliscor, amazing Pokemon. U-turn, amazing move. Put them together. Wow, who could have seen this coming? But it does really go a long way in making Gliscor really as good. Because it always feels like Gliscor is underrated in Gen 4. I mean, maybe not so much when it was the current gen. Everyone's literally like, dude, max speed your Gliscor and spam it because it's broken. But, I mean, the timer it was putting people on was ridiculous. Because I remember Apologies had this great Gliscor team. Because it's not just like a Spikes adjacent Pokemon. Balance teams were great with it. Apologies' team Dinosaurs, I believe, also in the RMT archive on Smokin', was CB Azelf, Rox Heatran, Venusaur, Milotic. Yeah, he was using Venusaur and Milotic. That was the main draw. And then Scarf Rotom, I think. And the last was Gliscor. And Gliscor just anchored that team because it was so good against Stallbreaker Gliscor. That's what it was called. Because of the whole Taunt Toxic combo with Stab EQ to ward off steals and their rare poisons. And yeah, he was like, yeah, so many teams are just so bad against Gliscor. And if the opponent's only answer to Gliscor is offensive Suicune, which was the case very often, then he's like, I know I'll win. If their answer to Gliscor is Suicune, that's the game. Barring some, Pokemon stuff, obviously. But it's just, Gliscor's great speed really comes into effect in Gen 4 a lot, even when it's playing more defensive roles, because it doesn't have to max out its bulk. It can, and especially defensive Gliscor was being experimented with Heist and Earthworm, and I think Panamaxes too, maybe, in the post-Gen 4 era, just so it could do stupid things like Toxic and staying on Vaporeon, because Vaporeon used to be really common. It's like, oh, well, Gliscor's got to run from Vaporeon. It's like, oh, well, what if I could stay in on it? What if I could take a Draco Meteor from Mixmensch, which is ripping through everything? Stuff like that. So I guess it was experimented with, Mixed Knight, I'm sorry, yeah, because Mixed Knight was very annoying to stall teams. I'm not sure that it was being toyed with too much pre-Menspan, although it is possible. I know that the drafts of that Clefable HPI's Bronzong team, which, that team was really ahead of its time, that Earthworm Heist team, with HPI's Bronzong, Clefable, Clefable before Clefable was a big thing, by the way, I should say, and Spinef Gliscor, that was, I know the original versions of that were still when Mence and maybe even Latias were in the tier, but I think, I don't know if Gliscor was Spinef back then. Although very possible, considering, hey, Mixed Mence is scary, Vaporeon is common. But, yeah, that's another thing. Vaporeon is your only Gliscor answer. Yeah, it's so easy for just standard Gliscor to wall so many Pokemon on a team because of how robust it is defensively. And for those one or two things that can actually deal with it to not be super secure against it long term, and it just outlasts you. And that to go back to that great speed, that's really on display in Gen 4 because it's so tanky and it can still afford to run a lot of speed. Whereas in the newer gens, it's like, I really got to max out this bulk to take out the hard hits. Like in Gen 5, if it's physically defensive, I got to take on this Terrakion, this Garchomp. What are you talking about speed? It would run some speed sometimes, but like not a ton. I think it was like 56 defense was the standard. But I always thought that was a waste. You gotta max it. And if you're running Spinef, obviously you gotta max that. Or very close to it because of Gliscor's lower natural Spinef stat by a lot. It's the same in Gens 6 and 7, to the point where you have Heatran sets with HP Ice, which go, yeah, I'm going to outspeed that Gliscor because it's going to be slow. Whereas in obviously faster Gliscor doesn't switch into Heatran as well, but you don't also want to be switching into Heatran with Gen 4 Gliscor because no Poison Heal, no immunity to Lava Plume Burn. That's another big major boost for Gliscor in Gen 5 and onwards, where Heatran Lava Plume annoys everything, and I'll use my Gliscor on it. Gliscor is the #1 reason why HP Ice is as popular as it is on non-scarfed Heatran in Gen 5 and onwards, because Gen 4 Heatran can use HP Ice, but really on Scarf as a revenge kill for D-Knight and Flygon. And the OHKO on Gliscor is very nice, but that's because you're outspeeding it. Because you're scarfed, not because of the other way around, where it's like, oh, my offensive Heatran, I just got to chuck HP Ice on it, because otherwise Gliscor is going to stonewall me. None of that. So, Yeah, taunts. I remember I was talking with my buddy Roscoe about this, and when Gen 4 was the current gen still, and we were like, dude, you know that sinking feeling when you lead off with a Swampert and you see a Roserade lead? It's just the worst thing ever. And it's like, oh, but you know what's worse than that though? Scarf T-Tar and Gliscor together, because you know that Scarf T-Tar is going to help finish off your Gengar or whatever, and then Gliscor is just going to ruin you. And to go back to that speed stat, it also ties in the offensive Suicune example, because it's not just as long as my Suicune is alive, then I'll have a way to threaten the Gliscor in the same way something like Keldeo or Greninja might, because they're faster, but offensive Suicune is slower than Gliscor, so it's like, oh, my Suicune has to be alive and stay above, you know, stay out of EQ range. So you have you are at a very fast ticking timer there. So yeah, not to say there weren't other sets experimented with afterwards. At post Gen 4, I was messing around with Sub-Roost Toxic with the team that really destroyed Skarmory, so they didn't need Taunt as much. And obviously, you know, it's devastating. You know, you Toxic. It was a little gratuitous in that, yeah, I would have liked Toxic, or sorry, I would have liked Taunt. But it also lets you do really, really silly things, like, you know, mess with Kingdras, like Rain Dance Kingdras one-on-one. So just to see, oh, they Rain Dance because they thought you were gonna switch. Oh, never mind. You know, things like that. You get to scout what they're doing. Very good for something like Mixed Dragonite, for example. But yeah, there's the biggest. I mean, talking about Sandvale, that as Gliscor got Sandvale banned in Black and White 2 because even the people who were like, "Oh, just use Zoom Lens Slowbro," LOL. That was a real thing people said, believe it or not. You can go back and check the forum threads if you don't believe me. There were people saying just use Zoom Lens Slowbro so you increase your accuracy against Sandvale Gliscor. Ridiculous stuff. Anyway. And if you're wondering, oh, why is it ridiculous to use an item? Well, it's because it is an RNG influenced item, which is an unreasonable. Using such an item that is so much worse, you know, against everything else, just to try and hit this RNG abusing Pokemon, that is not competitive. That's why. So, yeah, eventually enough people were like, yeah, okay, this Sandvale Gliscor thing is absolutely absurd, and it doesn't have to be literally Garchomp in order to get banned. It was so dumb. Hey, at least Garchomp was vulnerable to Toxic Spikes, am I right? But, oh yeah, it was so dumb. So many tournament games would be lost because, oh, I missed HP Ice on that Gliscor. Oh, I missed Scarf Jirachi Ice Punch on that Gliscor. Oh, I missed Ice Beam. Oh, no, you know? It's like, oh yeah, just switching your Politoed to get the rain up against it and to get absolutely destroyed by a Flying Gem boosted Acrobatics. Oh, you know, burn the Flying Gem. Oh, so the Acrobatics can just be strong afterwards? Yeah, not as strong, but it's still 110 base power. It's stronger than EQ. Yeah, goodness. And people are like, oh, well, its attack stat isn't that high. It's like, yeah, it's also not very low, and it's SDing, and great stab combination. Anyway, yeah, so it got... Gliscor is actually the reason why Garchomp came back to Gen 5 in Black and White 2, because in Black and White 1, Garchomp only had Sandvale and was banned because Sandvale was stupid. But then it was like, oh no, it's just Garchomp. No, Gliscor could never. Cacturne could never. But then it was mostly Gliscor. And then in Black and White 2, Rough Skin was released, and then Gliscor was still making sure everyone hated Sandvale, and then that was gone. It's like, oh, we can bring Garchomp back now. How cool is that? So... But yeah, Gen 4 in 2015 went through a period of really horrible Gliscor Sandvale abuse. It was a lot of para spam alongside sub SD EQ Ice Fang Gliscor with leftovers. And the main advantage this has over its Gen 5 counterpart is that it can afford lefties for healing. For healing, obviously. I mean, to generate more substitutes. You know, because sometimes people would say, like on sub-SD Garchomp with Sandvale, oh, well, why don't you use Bright Powder on it to increase your odds of dodging moves? Well, you get more substitutes, and that lets you fish for misses more efficiently with leftovers. With leftovers, you get to do that more than Bright Powder. Plus, you know, by leftovers giving you more opportunities in general, then you are more able to fish for those opportunities. Not to say that Bright Powder wouldn't do the most heinous things ever, but that was also Bright Powder being stupid in RNG. But yeah, sub-SD Lefties Gliscor was very irritating for that reason, because, like, let's say you're trying to hit HP ices against it with Fori and Gen 5. It's like, okay, well, it doesn't have lefty, so it can only sub so many times. Small comfort, yes, but you got to take whatever you can get against this monstrosity. And then you have the Gen 4 counterpart, where it's like, I better hit a lot of HP ices against this because it's subbing repeatedly. And you mix paralysis, and it's just so gross. I remember during that time period, I was putting ice moves on everything. Obviously, still the whole sand veil of it all is that you can have all the ice moves in the world, but at least if Gliscor is beating you despite having a million ice moves, it's doing so because it's just beating you, not because you missed attacks not because your Ice Beam became Stone Edge accuracy. That is not the way it should be. So, yeah, that was quite gruesome. But fortunately, after much kicking and screaming, from the players who didn't actually play the game and were like, you know what? If you want to bring sand, that's just the risk you should accept. You should accept that your HP ice might not hit that Gliscor. And that was incredibly dumb for the reasons already explained. The whole, oh, well, it's art. Oh, God, thinking about it just... I mean, this is what Gliscor taunts you, not just, literally, but also with that grin on its face as it... I mean, it doesn't have to use Sand Veil to, make you feel poorly while being whittled to death by it slowly. Because it's just smiling at you and you're just going, insert expletives here. But, yeah, then that fortunately got banned. I was using, like, HP Ice Rotom and stuff. Like, not on Scarf, just, like, Lefty's HP Ice Rotom. Like, okay, whatever. I can't... Shadow Ball's not good enough. You gotta HP Ice. So, yeah, that period was tumultuous, to be sure, because you couldn't just Skarmory it, because obviously it was being paired with lots of Magnezone, and Shed Shell is kind of And then HP Ice Bronzong was something I was using a lot of at that time. I just trying to limit its opportunities. But, I mean, it was doing so many. I remember I had this tour game. It was an offensive Suicune, a full health offensive Suicune against a less than full health Sandvale Gliscor, and it won the matchup one-on-one because it subbed, Ice Beam missed, it SD'd, Ice Beam hit, it subbed again, and Ice Beam hit, subbed again. Oh, well, there's the miss. Oh, well, you're chaining together 80% moves, so of course they're going to miss. That's not exactly a high percentage strategy. Let me get the music playing again. So, and then, 2 KOs with EQ, and then it's off to the races. If you even hit that Ice Beam afterwards. Oh, even if you do, then it still has several more chances to sub, and you're throwing 80%. And, I mean, if you think that's okay, then try repeatedly hitting something that's subbing with Stone Edge or Hydro Pump. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. Yeah. I mean, that's why Sub Protect Toxic Gliscor started being used to begin with, because no longer did you have to run from Rotom Wash until it had exhausted its 8 Hydro Pumps. You would sub on it very, very safely, and you would just drain it out of Hydro Pumps very quickly. Oh, speaking of weird Gliscor sets in Gen 5, it started off running, literally, I swear to God, Protect, Fling Acrobatics. You would fling the Toxic Orb to poison something, and then you have a fully powered Acrobatics because you got rid of your own item. So... yeah, I'm going to take one of my famous bathroom breaks, and I hope that I don't run into Gliscor while I'm there. Yeah, I was basically Terra Water Gliscor there for a second from how hydrated I am. And I was just thinking about it. I wonder if it ever like SD Terra blasted water or something. That's such a funny idea. Anyway, yeah, then other Gliscor sets got experimented with in Gen 4. Some very cool ones, mostly revolving around SD. Well, actually, I should say Scarf was always kind of theorized as, oh, it could because it's a fighting-resistant Scarfer, and, you know, the Scarfers that beat Lucario were just a Pursuit Weak Rotom, and that's, you know, tumultuous. And it's got U-turn and everything, and it has been used to some decent effect. I wouldn't call it amazing. You know, it's not a Scarfer you love using, but it can definitely get the job done. Nice to have some real bulk on a Scarfer like that, just natural physical bulk. But I should also say the variants of SD that have been popping up, I really like SD Knockoff. Like SD Knockoff EQ Ice Fang, because if you face, I mean, you can, early on you just function like a knockoff Gliscor, and if their answer is like a Swampert or something, then you wear it down, and then later on you SD. Because SD EQ Ice Fang is really most of what you need, and the last slot can be, like, for example, a few years ago, I was experimenting a lot with SD EQ Ice Fang Thunder Fang, and I really like that set, because you would just not get stopped by Gyarados at all. And you also hit Skarmory hard, so you didn't have to, you know, put on anti-Skarmory support or anything. You would just, you know, barrage it with Thunderfang over and over and over. So there was that, and I'm sure you could do some SD U-turns. I mean, like in Oris, there were like SD. I think Urz was using, he was using SD U-turn Gliscor, and it was a great set. You know, so just. Yeah, SD EQ Roost U-turn. It just goes to show you can do anything with it. So, yeah, but that one hasn't been used much in Gen 4. But just that SD EQ Ice Fang, I'm sure you could taunt, although I'm not sure about that one. I'm sure you could Stealth Rock if you really wanted to. But yeah, Ice Fang Knockoff because you just weaken Skarmory. And if you got a Magnezone with it, then the Skarmory is Shed Shell. Oh, well, there goes the Shed Shell. So it's a great combination in general. I also I've seen, this one's a classic, but what's newer about it is it being used on hyper offense teams as opposed to more bulky offense teams. But, I mean, this was a classic which has, not SD Metagross, good lord. No, Iron Ball Metagross tricking the Iron Ball to either a Rotom Appliance or Skarmory, and that makes obviously EQ spam really dangerous. So, you know, it's been paired with things like Flygon and sometimes CB Swampert, but Gliscor is a natural pairing for that. So yeah, that's a real, and using it on hyper offense is a really nice way of putting Gliscor on offense without, you know, having issues with Skarmory. And, you know, that Metagross set is really good for hyper offense in general, so I like that a lot. And another new one that I think my buddy Jirachi pioneered was SD Sky Attack with Power Herb. And he used it in an SPL game, and he just blew a Milotic away after an SD. It was sight to see. Beautiful. And it's just such a great stab move, you know, because, yes, it's only one time, but that one time might be all you need. Or technically twice if you really want to pull it off on a switch. But, I mean, that whole clean Oko on Breloom one-on-one. Oh, Balance teams actually, speaking of Magnezone, they started using Gliscor more with, like, Wing Attack. If you could afford not running Ice Fang on it, which, you know, there's lots of ways to do that. But Wing Attack just to really make sure, because, you know, Breloom can stay and try to slug it out against Ice Fang sometimes. God, I remember at the peak of Breloom Mania, people were thinking about running relaxed Gliscor, like 0 speed to underspeed Breloom, and not take super effective damage from Seed Bomb on the Roost. Not the worst idea, but then you have a very slow Gliscor, and that can be exploitable, and yeah. So Wing Attack, or because at first it was Aerial Ace, and then we're like, wait, there's no reason you should run Aerial Ace if there's no, you know, Sand Veil or anything. So you just go with Wing Attack because it has a lot of PP, very good for long games. And yeah, so that started seeing more use, like Tauntless, Wing Attack kind of Gliscors on Balance teams. And then, you know, you could throw SD on it. You can do anything with Gliscor. That's why it's so great. But yeah, SD Sky Attack with Power Herb. I mean, Power Herb Sky Attack Gliscor was not unheard of. I think Hitmonlee was using it in Gen 4 when Lead Machamp first came onto the scene. It was killing everything, and you couldn't walk outside without facing 5 Lead Machamps and getting blown away by 4 of them. And people were just thinking of all these how do I beat Machamp strategies, and surprise, because Gliscor was a common lead. It's not so common anymore, but it was one of the most popular leads when Gen 4 was current. And, I mean, it wasn't on the level of, like, an Azelf or a Roserade or Metagross or something, but it was a common lead, with rocks or without, usually with. And, Machamp, Standard Machamp obviously beats that one-on-one. And, oh, well, what's this? Well, Sky Attack, and it's blown away. Now, I don't think that ever took off, but... Yeah, Sky Attack also lets you dominate Machamp one-on-one in general now. Which is why it has so many applications, not just because of the coverage, but because of the incredible power. I mean, 140 base, that's monstrous. There was this game a tournament game a few months ago where an Abomasnow switched into a Gliscor as it used Sky Attack, and it missed. It was tragic. Yeah, so I really like that set. I think it's very cool, and it just goes to show there's always going to be something more you can do with Gliscor, and it's always going to be great. And, I can't believe I mentioned Sandvale Gliscor. I mean, it used to be that Sandvale wasn't something that Gliscor actively fished for in Gen 4. It was just something you got as a byproduct of using Gliscor and there being sand everywhere. Like, Zac91, I mean, they called it the spin-blocking Gliscor. Because it's like, oh, well, why would he need a ghost type to block Rapid Spin when he could just switch his Gliscor in against it and it would miss? So... Yeah, that was... People they called it the British Gliscor as well. They hated it so much. It was vile. Because Taunt Toxic Gliscor was already the toughest thing in the world to beat, and then, oh, well, now you just miss a bunch of ice moves on it, and, it just becomes absolutely outrageous. Because it's not like, it's not doing any damage. It's whittling you down very quickly. Everything matters. So... I think it's a very good thing we no longer have to deal with that. Because Gliscor has an alternate ability in Hypercutter. Hypercutter is actually a very good ability for its SD sets because it means that it can't be intimidated by Gyarados. That's absolutely amazing. But, even on the sets where it doesn't really make much of a difference. Oh, I should say Wing Attack also helps dealing with Machamp better one-on-one. But even on the sets where it doesn't really make much of a difference, like, yeah, okay, Gyarados can't intimidate you as it switches in and takes, like, an Ice Fang or a Wing Attack or something. That's really not going to make too much of a difference. I mean, it's nice, don't get me wrong, every percentage counts. But really, it's just, don't let this thing have Sandvale. So many games. I remember this random tour game once where it was like, all right, DD Ice Punch T-Tar sweeps. Oh, it missed Ice Punch on the Gliscor. Never mind. It was just it would happen so consistently. It's like, this is not just like, oh, well, that's the game. It was, I would take all the Iron Head Jirachis in the world over a Sandvale Gliscor. Without question. No hesitation whatsoever. Oh, it is just a gruesome, gruesome Pokemon to face. Yeah. So... yeah, I'm just very nostalgic for all those days of Gliscor, those days of being wild. Yeah, Gliscor's facing off against each other. Ice Fang Wars, Speed Creep Wars, Taunt Wars. Yeah, running enough speed on sub Gliscor in Gen 5 to not get toxic by toxic Gliscor first. And this is so much more fun and nuanced than, Landorus is HP icing each other, I think. Because Ice Fang from Gliscor does not do that much to another Gliscor. Not in the, same immediate threat of Landos HP icing each other anyway. And it's not relying on hidden power, so it doesn't go away when, not that there aren't complete Gliscor stalemates. God, Spadef Gliscor early in XY to stop Toxic Aegislash. What a nightmare that was. Yeah, and it was stopping early variants of Landorus Incarnate as well, because it was running, like, Psychic. And then, obviously it started running HP Ice. Oh, well, that doesn't work. But it was still, a defining Pokemon. Like those balance teams. Look, the Gliscor Scarf T-Tar pairing transcends generations. Whether it's being paired with Fori or Skarm or Wish Calm Mind, Jirachi, whatever it is. Or Spadef Heatran, all these common partners. Clefable. the more newfangled style, whatever water type you're pairing with it. It's just a thing of beauty. You know, because it's very hard to break through the Gliscor except with like very strong, hard-hitting Pokemon, and those are the that don't switch in very well. But those strong, hard-hitting Pokemon are on a timer. You know, residual damage, much of it coming from Gliscor, and then also Scarf-Titar Sand. And Scarf-Titar also outspeeds these things, can put a big dent in them, and with Pursuit, oh, it's just. And when Gliscor enables Scarf-Titar with U-turn, oh, it's poetry in motion. That's the kind of synergy you dream about. So, was that an important text? Oh, no, it wasn't. Well, I shouldn't say that as much, but it's not essential. Not as essential as Gliscor is in my heart. I mean, speaking of my buddy having kids, or having a kid, I should say. I've thought about this years before. I mean, I thought about it when I was a young, foolish guy, as opposed to now, haha. But I was like, I wonder if I have kids someday. Like, am I really? Yeah, I'm sure I'll know everything about them and whatever. But I just wonder, like, will I know my kids as well as I know DPPOU? I would, hope to try, obviously. But I don't know. All these, it's putting a big dumb grin on my face, thinking about Gliscor in Gen 4 OU. I mean, the others too, because a lot of this Gen 4 stuff did come in the post Gen 4 period. But, so it also overlaps with things like Gen 5 and 6 and just like Gliscor doing it over and over again. And it's like, oh, look, another generation where nobody can kill Gliscor. Gliscor in Gen 7 UU. God almighty, that was horrible. I remember seeing it. There was this game, I think I have it somewhere on the channel, like my favorite SPL replays or something. It was TDK versus Christo, I think. And it was like, I think it was Gliscor Wars, and I think that was the game where like they just kept pursuing, like they both had like 2 or 3 Pokemon with Pursuit, and Pursuit was like every other move. And like Gliscor was getting pursued by Mega Aerodactyl because it had to run away from the Tough Claws boosted Ice Fang. And it's funny that Tough Claws boost Ice Fang. I know why, but anyway. And it was like, well, I need some damage on the Gliscor. And then it's like, well, yeah, you did. What else were you going to do? Let it switch out for free? Oh, well, because Arrow's taking the Rock's damage, and and it's like, oh, well, whether you pursued it or not, Gliscor is still going to get that health back. And it's still going to outlast you no matter what you do. And that's what it feels like to play against Gliscor sometimes. It's just, no matter what you do, it's going to win. The only way to beat it, you're on Gliscor. Exaggeration, of course, but, I mean, I really still feel what I was saying to Roscoe back then when I was 14. It's like, dude, there's nothing scarier than a good Gliscor Scarf-Titar team. It is just ruinous. There's nothing it can't handle if you play it well and support it well. Yeah. I mean, it's such an association with, like, hardcore stall teams, but it was really as much of a balanced Pokemon as anything else. And yeah, it could do anything. Yeah, you could run like even my buddy who just had the kid, like he used to say, like, guys, I don't know why we're bothering with this Jolly Gliscor nonsense. I'm not risking speed ties against other Gliscors, and I'm just gonna use Impish Gliscor to outspeed Adamant Lucario, and by extension Heatran, of course, because nobody's running Jolly Lucario, and at the time the only Ice Punch Lucarios are going to be Adamant anyway, so you actually want Impish to have a better chance at hitting them, or surviving them. And I think Jolly SD Ice Punch Luke is stupid as hell anyway. Because, you just bank on Gliscor. No, it's dumb. You hit it on the switch. So, yeah, and, he would just do stuff like that. It's like, oh, well, now his Impish Gliscor is even tougher to break through for things like, Flygon or whatever. It's just always it's always deceptively bulky. It's like, this thing's not that immortal, and then, it just kind of withstands everything. Yeah, oh, that was another reason why, physically defensive Protect Gliscor, I helped bring it back in Gen 5. Sorry for self-promoting or whatever. Actually, I'm not sorry about self-promoting my movie, the link to which is in the description. But, yeah, it was because Excadrill was back with Sandrush on rain teams, and it was the stupidest thing ever. It's like, well, you can't really roost stall this, but you can go for Protect. Obviously, protecting in front of a boosted Sandrush Excadrill is the riskiest thing ever, but it's better than not having the option at all with Roost, so, yeah. And it had to be physically defensive, because otherwise you just crumple. Yeah, so, yeah, I don't know, just thinking about Gliscor is just, it's always, how do I phrase it? There's some teams that are just going to be, more reliable than others. Not that, the quote-unquote less reliable teams can't win consistently, but, you have to... They really require a higher degree of precision. Not that Gliscor doesn't, but it just naturally can be so overwhelming that it can really carry you in a lot of spots. Like in those matchups we talked about where offensive Suicune is the only switch-in. It's like, yeah, well, you'd have to really try to throw that one away. I mean, not that your opponent couldn't, theoretically, really pull off some excellent stuff. But, I mean, if the matchup is that lopsided, that it's just Gliscor beating 5 Pokemon and then an offensive Suicune, then yeah, it's going to be ugly. And, I mean, it's not like literally Gliscor would just beat everything else perfectly one-on-one, but nothing else would really want to switch in without being ruined is kind of the idea. And if you switch Suicune in, then, it just gets worn down. Oh, and you switch to your counter, and there you go. Yeah, so, an ode to Gliscor's glory, and remembering all the times he gored opponents with Sandvale. Oh Lord, it was, I don't know. I mean, Garchomp was, don't get me wrong, Garchomp was the dumbest thing ever, but I had a special hatred for Gliscor, just because. Again, that Spikes immunity, you think, oh, it's not that big a deal, but that Spikes and Earthquake immunity. It's like, oh, don't get a free sub. Okay, so don't use like half the viable Pokemon. That's that's always the silly part of logic like that. But yeah, Gliscor to me is just the epitome of consistency, and I really value consistency. Putting aside my own control freak tendencies about not wanting things to get away from me. Wow, that was deep. It's also just when you need to rely on your own play and your own positioning and things like that. And you have to worry less about what the opponent does because your team covers so much so well. That's when, Gliscor steps in. It's, what can you really do? Just so many gen in, gen out. Like, the opponent's bringing Gliscor. Okay, and? I'm not saying it's like it's the GSC Zapdos of Gen 4 and onwards, but I kind of am. No, I'm exaggerating. It's not that overpowered. But all I'm saying is people have tried to ban Gliscor in more gens that they've tried to ban Zapdos. So, yeah, there have been, I mean, it never really got any sort of traction at all. But there have been people who said, dude, you got to do something about Gliscor in Gen 6 or Gen 7. It's out of control. It's absolutely outrageous. And there's some degree of sympathy you feel when you see Gliscor roost stalling Latios. I mean, what is going on there? Gen 4 Ubers Gliscor. I mean, it doesn't roost stall Latios there. Not at all. But Spadef Gliscor does great things. I mean, look, Taunt Gliscor is great there for dealing with the bulk-centered teams that are really popular there. Like that, the Sunstalls with like Cresselia and stuff, those hate Gliscor. A lot of time their only recourse would be like, oh, well, I gotta spin with Fori and then, sit on it, switch around on it. But like, if your spin gets blocked, then, it's not a matter of Gliscor soloing. It's just Gliscor plus the bare minimum of support against their, lackluster response to it. And then you're in the clear. So, yeah, but Spadef Gliscor is really nice there because then suddenly it's capable of taking on things like Giratina, Origin, Draco Meteor, not switching in or anything, but like you can roost stall it for sure. And it just does that amazing put things on a timer deal that it does. So it's just beautiful to see Gliscor succeed even in Ubers, even though you think, oh no, the metagame's too strong for it. But no, it's a genuinely good Pokemon. So, and of course, Gliscor is also very valuable because Lucario is terrifying in Ubers. Better than it is in OU. So to have such a hard stop is incredibly rare. Most of the time dealing with Luke and Ubers is not a matter of really checking it hard, but just playing around it. So, alright, that's going to be it from me because this is hitting an hour. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bless Gliscor.